Mr. Elon Musk is looking forward to Arc AGI 3. Why, you might ask? Because he killed Arc AGI 2. Just smoked it. Now, at this point, you've probably heard tons of things being said about the new GROK 4. You probably saw it completely crush everyone else on humanity's last exam. Both GROK 4 and GROK 4 Heavy are head and shoulders above the competition, above Gemini 2.5 Pro, above O3. And notice that that gap exists, tools or no tools, or I should say no tools in this one, and tool usage here. Now, you might have noticed that things like O3 Pro and the new GROK 4 Heavy and GROK 4, they have tool use. So it's not really like the models of old, like we were used to just, 6 plus, 12 plus months ago, where you kind of prompted and see the output. Now, a lot of the stuff that's happening behind the scenes is hidden. You're not really seeing the chain of thoughts kind of as it's thinking through stuff. You're not even seeing all the tools that it's running in the background. If you used something like the O3 Pro, for example, it can be doing a lot of stuff in the background that you might not even notice that it's doing. Like, for example, it's able to run some code, execute it, and then just give you kind of the answers from the code. It doesn't even give you the code. You don't see the code, but in the kind of that scratch pad on the side where it jots down its thoughts or the summary of its thoughts, there might be a sentence or two that kind of hints at it, like, oh, I ran this in my notebook, and here's the output of the Python code or something like that. So you know it's doing something in the background that you're not seeing. And it seems like all of the companies are now going more towards that. So we're not interacting with the models one-on-one, we're more dealing with the system. So it's the model plus the suite of tools that it can use. And we don't even necessarily exactly know what it has access to. But it's probably things like searching the web, running some basic code, etc. Now, these are excellent results, but keep in mind that Google DeepMind might be hot on their tails. Gemini 3.0 Pro has been spotted out there, so we might be seeing it soon. Both Sundar Pichai and Demis Hassabis have congratulated Elon Musk on publishing his brand new GROK 4. So that's the CEO of Google, CEO of Google DeepMind. But it begs the question, what happens when they drop this Gemini 3.0 Pro? And it seems like that's going to be pretty soon. Where's that going to land? Is GROK 4 going to be the #1 AI model in the world for a long time, or maybe not so much? Jimmy Apples, who has called some things before, leaked some information long before it was available to the public. So I tend to kind of trust what he says, with a grain of salt, but he's been right before, eerily right before. So definitely don't dismiss this. He's saying that he's hearing a few whispers from some birds. It's got to be a Game of Thrones reference, that the internal evals for GPT-5 that is rumored to come out soon, very soon as well. So we're going to be seeing in GPT-5 that those are a tad over GROK 4 Heavy. So just to summarize, Elon Musk, who started much later than the other companies in the AI space, he comes from behind and lands in the #1 spot. Look at the AIME 25, 100%. That benchmark is dead and buried. What's the secret to his success? Well, notice he didn't shell out billions acquiring talent like Meta is doing. We don't know if he has some breakthrough algorithmic thing that put him ahead. Probably not. Probably similar to what everybody else is doing. Maybe we'll find out later that that's not the case. He's got some secret weapon up his sleeve. But the solution to things like this sometimes, and if you've played a Factorio, you know this, sometimes you just need more. Like a lot more than you think, a lot more than is reasonable, a lot more of stuff, of everything. In this case, the everything is compute. So we've got 100,000 H100s NVIDIA's GPUs, and I think they're going to be taking it to 200,000. Also, you know how sometimes you order a package on Amazon and it'll gets delivered to your house. Elon also orders things to be delivered to his house, but he orders an overseas power plant, like a power plant to be delivered. So he's buying an overseas power plant and he's getting it shipped to Memphis instead of, building it here just because of the red tape. So as you can see here in this chart, right, 10x compute, pre-training compute from GROK 2 to GROK 3, 10x reinforcement learning compute for GROK 4 reasoning, 10x what they used for GROK 3 reasoning. Now it looks like here the pre-training compute is the same, and the 10x RL compute is going on top of that. And they've also mentioned that the next generation, the GROK 5, is starting training right now. This, to me, kind of reinforces that idea brought by someone from OpenAI, where they're saying, like, basically that, for example, on the GPT-4o, which was not a reasoning model, right, all of the compute went towards pre-training. The O1, which was the first reasoning model, right, so it was able to reason before it answered, right? So we used reinforcement learning compute, but it was a tiny fraction of the total sort of the pre-training compute. O3, we used more reinforcement learning compute. So it's sort of like growing in proportion to the pre-training compute. At some point, we expect it to get closer and closer in size to pre-training compute, right? So RL is going to keep growing, reinforcement learning, how much hardware we throw at that is going to keep growing and growing, eventually completely dwarfing the pre-training compute. By the way, this might mean that we're throwing the same amount of pre-training compute. This little circle is the same as this, but the amount of reinforcement learning compute that we throw at it is 10 times more, 20 times more. That seems to be what this is suggesting, right? So this idea that scaling is hitting a wall, I think, is misleading. And really what we should be keeping an eye on is this. So they said that they're going to release a GROK 4's coding model within weeks. So probably, I think they said 4 weeks or so. So probably we're going to see it sometime in August. That to me is going to be the ultimate test, because we're going to be able to take that coding model and really put it head to head with the rest of the coding models to see what that kind of final version of that looks like. Because right now, testing GROK 4 and GROK 4 Heavy, the coding looks good, but it's not like mind blowing. It's not the big leap that you would expect. And that's because that's not the coding model yet. The RL that goes into making it a good coder that hasn't been completed yet. We're going to see that in 4 weeks. Hopefully, or, whatever 4 weeks is in Elon time. So we'll see. But once that comes out, it'll be really interesting to know what kind of an effect that's going to have versus kind of like the coding models that we have now. Is it going to be massively, massively better? Time will tell. So wait for that. But this is where things get super interesting. There seems to be this new metric developing, and I don't know if we even necessarily have a word for it yet, but basically there's this idea of crystallized intelligence and fluid intelligence. So fluid intelligence you can think of as the ability to solve new problems, stuff that you haven't really dealt with before, right? So if you're thrown into a new situation, regardless of your previous experience or education or something like that, how well are you able to deal with those new challenges? This is as opposed to something like crystallized intelligence. That's kind of like the ability for us to draw on our past and our experience. It's kind of like what we sort of over time develop. Generally, when you're younger, you probably have a better fluid intelligence. And as you get older, you probably have better crystallized intelligence. Again, that's kind of generalizing, but fluid intelligence typically peaks in early adulthood. That's why they sometimes say it's harder to go to school if you're older. And that's why we kind of want the kids to be learning a bunch of new stuff, because that's kind of the time where they really show that kind of a level of fluid intelligence. Now, if you think about it, do large language models, do they have fluid intelligence, or do they have crystallized intelligence? They have very little fluid intelligence. They have tons of crystallized intelligence, right? They can draw on their vocabulary, their vast knowledge base, but the idea of solving problems that are kind of in new environments, that idea of kind of coming up with innovative solutions, LLMs are terrible at that. So that's why when Greg Kamrad, so he's the president of ArcPrize, founder of leverage.to, when he is saying that GROK 4 is showing non-zero levels of fluid intelligence, as in it has some fluid intelligence, that kind of rings a bell for me. What's the expression? Red flag rings a bell? My ears perked up. That's what it was. My ears perked up. And the reason he's saying that is this. If you take a look at this chart, there's one data point on here that's not like the others. So here we have kind of the cost per task, so kind of per problem on the ArcAGI benchmark, like how much in compute API credits, how much does it cost for one of these models to solve one of those tasks? Now, the reason we're tracking that is because on the original ArcAGI, on the original one, I think it was the O3 preview or the O1, I don't recall, but one of the OpenAI reasoning models was able to crack it. It was able to beat the human baseline thereby sort of breaking that benchmark, because that was the original thing that they said would not be accomplished for a while, but it was. There was only one catch. The price per task was very, very high. I think I did kind of some estimations. I think it was something like 300,000 to take that test with that model. That would be kind of like if you and I were paying for those API costs, that how much it would cost us. But either way, it was like a lot of money. Notice this is a logarithmic as well. So from 1 to 10 to 100 to 1,000, right? So these are not the same increments. So the cost rapidly increases as we go in this direction. And on the y-axis, we have the score, how well it did. And as you can see, all these models, they're kind of clustered here somewhere, right? So this is like a 6% accuracy, 4% accuracy, right? The highest one amongst these, just over, let's call it just over 8% accuracy is Claude Opus 4. And then there's one that really stands alone, and that's GROK 4, the thinking model, right? Notice that it's sort of in line with the cost of most of these, but way better, sitting just above 16% score accuracy. Now, what's the big deal with ArcAGI? Why are we talking about ArcAGI? How's it different from the other benchmarks? Well, it was created by Francois Chollet. He wrote the book on intelligence, literally on a measure of intelligence. And he's saying that intelligence is measured by the efficiency of skill acquisition on unknown tasks. Simply, how quickly can you learn new skills? So the basic idea for AGI is that, these models can have some skills, they can accomplish certain things, but measuring task-specific skill is not a good proxy for intelligence, right? Most of these benchmarks, they measure the thing's ability at a certain skill. Can you answer these PhD level questions? Can you solve these types of math problems? ArcAGI and Francois Chollet, they kind of turned the problem on its head. They didn't care about specific skills, but rather they wanted to try to test for something different, something that is very, very easy for humans and that is near impossible for these large language models. So we were interested in skill acquisition and generalization rather than the skill itself. So if a kid is rapidly able to figure out how to add and subtract and divide numbers, we'll say, wow, that's a smart kid, even though a calculator is a million times better, but it's a static, it's good at that, quote unquote skill, but it can't acquire new skills. A kid that quickly acquires skills, we'd say he has a high intelligence. Or another way of saying this is this ArcAGI prize or it has a prize, but the ArcAGI benchmark, it's focused on fluid intelligence, right? The ability to reason, solve novel problems, adapt, basically, rather than crystallized intelligence. So LLMs are good at crystallized intelligence. Most benchmarks measure crystallized intelligence. And what we've been seeing is these LLM models kind of crawled their way up to the top with crystallized intelligence. What they sucked at was fluid intelligence, the ability to rapidly adapt and learn on the job, so to speak, which again is easy for humans. And the problems on there look kind of like this. We've broken down in a number of different videos, so we're not going to go over it again. It might seem complicated at first, but once it clicks, you're like, oh, I get it. And then it becomes very easy to do that set of problems. So a different way of saying it is like you need to look at it, figure out like what sort of a mental tool I need to create to solve these problems. And then it's fairly easy to solve the problems. The problems themselves are somewhat simple. And that's why prior to this, for the most part, all these models really struggled. I mean, 6% and thereabouts kind of were some of the higher ones, even stuff as good as the O3 High, which is a very good model. O3 Pro, even though it cost a lot of money to run, what is that, 5% accuracy? And then a few days ago, they got a call from XAI, 24 hours before I think they published all these results. And they want to test GROK 4 on the ArcAGI. So again, this is Greg from ArcAGI. So he's saying, we've heard the rumors. We knew it would be good. We didn't know it would become the #1 public model on ArcAGI. Here's the testing story and what the results mean. They chatted with Jimmy from the XAI team. They wanted to validate the GROK 4 score. They did their own testing, but they wanted to validate the score, measure possible overfitting. So basically, you're able to kind of fudge the numbers a little bit by training these models on the tests or similar tests and get a higher score, but not because it generalizes well, it's just more like memorization. And so to get the official score, a couple of things must be true. One, the new model has to be tested on the sort of semi-private evaluation sets, right? And has to be tested by, I assume, somebody at ArcAGI. And there's rules like, no data retention by XAI. In this case, the model checkpoint must be intended for public use, right? So it can't be some secret model that only XAI can use. It has to be the model that all of us can use. And of course, no rate limits, so they don't have to wait for that. And so the facts, GROK 4 is now the top performing publicly available model on ArcAGI. This even outperforms purpose-built solutions submitted on Kaggle. So various machine learning approaches that are custom built for these tests, even those are not as good as GROK 4. Second, ArcAGI 2 is hard for current AI models. Why? Again, this is the important bit. So this is what we've been talking about. To score well, models have to learn a mini skill from a series of training examples, right? So they show them 3 examples, 1, 2, and 3. And you have to figure out, okay, what is the sort of common pattern? You kind of have to have a hypothesis, and then you're able to, they're calling that like a mini skill, right? Then you apply that to solving a problem, right? Then you have to demonstrate the skill at test time. The previous top score was 8%. And below 10% is noisy, meaning it could be inconclusive, right? But, 16% basically breaks through that noise barrier. And GROK is showing non-zero levels of fluid intelligence. So this might be a brand new sort of skill or ability that we look at for all of these models moving forward. And maybe this terminology, fluid intelligence, maybe that will stick, or maybe we're going to come up with something different. It doesn't matter. The question is, can these models adapt? Can they learn quickly in novel situations and apply that and go forward? Again, GROK 4 right now is one of the only models that's showing that. But, we're going to see the Gemini's answer to this drop soon. We're going to see GPT-5 drop soon. And it's going to be really interesting how well they do. Again, the rumors are that GPT-5 does a little bit better on this test. And the new ARC prize, the grand prize, is kind of like in this green rectangle. So basically, again, cost and score. This is on ArcAGI 1. So basically, as you can see here, you can kind of see kind of the pattern kind of going like this. So what we want to see is this continuing upwards in terms of a score, but also we kind of need to bend it back a little bit. And just if we get it right there by decreasing the cost per task. So we'll see how quickly the various models will get to there. But I think it's fair to say that it's definitely near the top. I think it's even fair to say that it's number 1. If you take a look at the reasoning average, it's number 1. It's lagging in coding and agentic coding, but keep in mind the coding model is not out yet. There's a few weeks left. So I would be wanting to look at those scores before kind of making the final decision. Notice that this non-coding model is not that far away from the other top models. Can't wait to see where the coding model lands. It's now the number 1 for the New York Times Connections benchmark. I actually tested it on today's New York Times Connections. It gets it. You got to tell it to not search for the answer, because otherwise it will just find the answer and be like, here, I think it's this, but it knows what the answer is. You got to say, don't do a search, figure it out. But it's very good at sorting those words into whatever category it thinks they should be under. One thing to keep in mind also is that, as some people are saying, like we spend 10x the amount of compute on reinforcement learning. Why aren't we seeing bigger jumps? Are we doing RL wrong? Well, here's Technium from News Research. We just interviewed one of the people from News Research. You'll be able to see that interview soon on the Wes and Dylan channel here on YouTube, or whatever podcast service you use. iTunes, Spotify, whatever. Check it out soon. That interview gets nuts. If you know anything about News Research, they're doing some pretty next level stuff. So as Technium is saying here, or is the base model weak? This is, I think, an interesting point to kind of noodle, is whether you're saying that these are ludicrous results, really good results, or maybe you're not impressed. Although, again, to me, they seem like good results. It is worth noting that this is driven largely by RL compute. A lot of this is RL compute. At some point, I think it's safe to say that they're probably going to throw a lot of compute at pre-training, and they're going to throw a lot of compute at reinforcement learning. So they'll take everything that worked here, and they're going to stack it on top of each other. They're going to combine all of those things into one insane model. Again, so far there is no wall. Maybe we'll hit one down the road, but right now it doesn't seem like just throwing more compute at the training, the reinforcement learning. It just seems to work. We might even be seeing some new abilities emerge, like the fluid intelligence, whether you agree with that or not. I think we're going to be seeing more tests trying to kind of suss that out. Are these models adapting on the fly? My personal testing so far, I think this chart is pretty much spot on. It's excellent at reasoning. Coding is good. It's good. It's a little bit underwhelming compared to, we have a few really excellent power players. Some people like the Claude version. Some people like Gemini better. But like Gemini 2.5 Pro is excellent. It's got a 1 million token context window. That's phenomenal. GROK 4, by the way, is not quite there, but it's bigger than the competition. So this is Elvis, aka Omar. So he gave a really good little write-up here. He said bookmark it. I did. But right, it's got a 256K context window. So again, bigger than the competition and not as big as the 1 million on the Gemini. And you might have heard about the vending machine bench. We covered all of those iterations where we're tasking various models to run a little vending machine operation. This is a specific experiment done at Anthropic headquarters where Claude runs this business. So you got a little checkout card here where Anthropic employees go in and they pay and they purchase various things, snacks and drinks. Claude's job is to order things. He can also chat with all the Anthropic employees in chat, whatever chat app that they use, Slack or whatever, and figure out what they want, stock those things, and hopefully churn a profit. Now, of course, some of the Anthropic employees try to rip Claude off by having it purchase, for example, tungsten cubes and then selling them at a loss. Again, I think this is because it's trained to be a helpful assistant. And we actually have an episode, an interview coming up about that, where we kind of dive deep into that. Because it's not trained to make a profit. It's trained to be helpful. So it wants to please you more than it wants to make a profit. So it'll take a loss. This massive drop is where it purchased a tungsten cube for whatever, $200 and then sold it for 10, whatever that number was, but it took a beating. The most precipitous drop was due to the purchase of a lot of metal cubes that then were sold for less than what Claudius paid. They gave him like a little character named Claudius. But the point of the experiment is to give one of these bots $500 and see how much money they can make by running this machine. So some of the worst ones lose money, so they end up with less than $500. The human baseline is $844 respectable, so you're making $350 or close to it. The reigning champions were, depending on how you're counting it, either Claude 3.5 Sonnet or Claude Opus 4, right? So they made the most amount of money. And there's a number of times that they run it. So depending on how well they do well or poorly, like kind of like what the average is. But their capitalist reign has been ended as GROK 4 takes the scene and just wipes the floor with everybody. This last number here, as you can see here, some of these numbers are like 86%, 82, 42%. It's kind of like how 15%, it's like how long did it continue trying to run a business before it like gave up and failed? Right, humans is 100%. They just keep doing it, right? Claude Opus 4, 99.5. Claude has some sort of a long-term stick-to-itiveness, as we've seen through a number of papers. Kind of is able to keep its eye on long-term goals longer than other models. But as you'll notice here, GROK 4 just goes toe-to-toe with it, rakes in, let's call it $4,700, right? So it almost 10x's its money, 10x. You give it 500, it give 5,000 back. Can you imagine having an AI business like that? So again, we're really going to see how this thing plays out probably over the next month and a half. Once we see the coding model drop, we're also going to see GPT-5 most likely. We're going to see Gemini 3.0 Pro, sounds like it. As those pieces fall into place, we'll kind of see where everything lands. But it doesn't seem like we're hitting a wall. It seems like the scaling is going to continue. GROK lands in the number one spot, or at least, if you don't like saying it's number one, it's definitely up there. We'll see how long that lasts again once all the other models come out. But for me personally, what's going to be super interesting to observe is, are we seeing a fluid intelligence emerge just as we throw more compute at it? Is that the reason it's getting better at running its business and making 10x the amount of money that you gave it? Wow. I still can't get over that, right? Let me know what you think about that. Do you think this is measuring fluid intelligence, or do you not like that word? Maybe there's a better word we can use to describe kind of that adaptation, kind of the novel approaches, kind of thinking on your feet, learning on the job, whatever you want to call it. Are we sort of seeing almost like a new skill emerge out of these models once we throw enough compute at it? Do you expect to see the same thing in the GPT-5, in the Gemini 3? And if you recently notice one of your friends or family members getting strangely good at Wordle and connections and those little games that you play every day, well, now you know why. With that said, my name is Wes Roth. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.